When Judas had left them, Jesus said, "Now is the Son of Man glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and God will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little while longer. I give you a new commandment: love one another. As I have loved you, so you also should love one another. This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Yesterday I had the opportunity to go to an ordination of 6 men who became deacons. And the processional hymn began as this: "Will you let me be your servant? Let me be as Christ to you. Will you let me be your servant? Let me be as Christ to you." And I thought about it, and as I thought about it, it certainly rings true to today's gospel. For it ends, "This is how all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." And so I'd like you to consider both of those phrases as we discuss today's readings. In the first reading, we find Paul and Barnabas coming to the disciples who are building a church. And they're worn out, frankly. They've been persecuted, and they've struggled. And so what does Paul bring them but God's love? He teaches them, he prays with them, and he discerns leaders. And why does he do that? Because he recognizes that it's through that active love that the church will grow. That the church will grow in faith, the church will grow in love, and the church will grow in Jesus Christ. And so I suggest to you today that we are in the same situation as those early apostles were. We are called to grow a church that is becoming less and less and is being persecuted from many areas. Now, we don't feel it physically as they did, but the fact of the matter is what we believe has become countercultural. And so we are asked to do as Paul and Barnabas did. We are asked to discern leadership. We are asked to love as Christ does. And so I ask you, would you consider St. John's a community of love that does just that? Would you consider St. John's a community that does just that? And I will suggest to you that we are. We have room to grow, of course, but we are that community of love. As you've heard from various people over the past 5 or 6 weeks in front of you before Mass, they have discussed the various ministries that they provide along with many others to discern your love of God. We've talked about faith formation and religious education. We've talked about liturgy, and we've talked about spiritual life. In all of those, we talk about the love of God. In all of those, we talk about loving one another. For we are a community of faith that is founded in love and must proceed in love because we have no other choice. You are here, I am here out of a love for God. And then we turn to John, and he talks about revelation. And he talks about all things being new. All things don't get new because there is no love. He's talking about Jesus conquering sin in a whole new heaven and a whole new earth where God is with humankind. Is that what you imagine? Is that what you imagine for yourselves? Is that what you imagine for your lives? I know I certainly try. Sometimes I succeed, sometimes I fail. But one thing I do know is that it can't happen unless we love one another. Unless we love one another as Christ does. I happen to believe that this happens. This takes place in the very nucleus of what I would call our society, in the family. And I would ask you to consider how your family interacts with each other. Do we serve each other, all of us? In the gospel, Jesus says, he refers to us and the disciples as children. And that the more I thought about it, the more it made sense to me. Because he wasn't looking down at us. He couldn't do that. It's not in who he is. He was calling us to consider how we are children and how we should act to each other. You parents and godparents, consider, how do you treat the children in your lives? You serve them, don't you? We make sure that they're safe. We make sure that they're fed. We make sure that they have nourishment and that we can give them everything that we can give them. Children, I hope you're listening, because this is what your parents do. This is what your grandparents do. And what I have to tell you is, unfortunately, it seems to stop there. If we consider our families, let's consider how we don't act in love, how we don't act as Christ does. So we are called to treat everyone with the love of God, but it has to become a practice in our families so that it becomes natural when we go outside and are considered different. And so as we move into the gospel, we move and we hear Jesus calling us children, and he calls us to have love for one another. He doesn't call us to have love for our neighbor, and he doesn't call us to have love for our enemy. John differentiates here. Because unfortunately, you and I are going to believe differently about who a neighbor is and who our enemy are. But if he says love for one another, that's pretty straightforward. That's pretty straightforward, and we have to recognize that the people that we're sitting next to in these pews, the people that we call brother and sister, whether it's here or at home, we are called to love one another as Jesus did. And I hope you can recall last week as Monsignor challenged us, I think, to know who Christ is. He challenged us to know who that good shepherd is. And I can tell you right now, after reflecting on this gospel, there is no way we can know who our good shepherd is and be like our good shepherd unless we can have love for one another. And we know it's not easy. Jesus doesn't speak in poetic lines, and he doesn't sing love songs. Jesus' love shows up in his actions. It shows up in servitude. While he walked this earth, the only thing he did was serve people. That's all he did. He cured the sick. He brought people back from life. He cured the blind. He bade people to go in peace with love. That's what our Lord did, and that is the practice that we are called to do if we are to know who the Good Shepherd is, if we are to make things well, if we are to be that community that grows. Now, I'd like you to consider, if you've never considered any of my homilies, consider these 3 questions. I can't remember them, so I don't know how I can expect you to remember them. But I had to write them down. But I would ask you to consider, how do you bring others to faith just as the disciples did? How do you bring others to faith just as the disciples did? So in order to do that, you'll have to reread the first reading. Jesus gave a new commandment: love one another. How do you show love to the people closest to you in your lives? How do we show love to the people closest to us in our lives? And when in your life did you make a conscious decision to act out of love? When in your life have you made a conscious decision to act out of love? And what helped you to do that? Was it prayer? Was it witness from someone else? How did that happen? And so I ask you to consider all these things, remembering that we are here as servants, that we are here to know and let others know that we are his disciples as long as we have love for one another. Amen.